Only a fraction, and the firing pin can release, strike the primer, and cause that gun to shoot, even though no one pulled the trigger. Only a fraction. Now, in the normal functioning of a gun, when it's cocked and that firing pin is held, you pull the trigger, it causes the sear to move on purpose, and the firing pin goes forward and strikes the round. That's what's supposed to happen. But when you drop it, it's supposed to stay firm. It's supposed to hold. And if it doesn't, it's defective. Because no gun should shoot when no one pulls the trigger. Now, knowing that, you know the safety makes no difference in a drop test because she was careful and she told you she took great pains. Nothing came in contact with that trigger. So the safety means nothing. Problem number 2. When she dropped it onto a rubber mat. And the purpose of the rubber mat was to cushion some of the impact. Inch-thick rubber. There was no rubber up on the deck on Mr. Monahan's deck on April 15th. If I drop an egg onto a pillow, there's going to be a decidedly different result than if I drop it onto the floor, because the cushion from the pillow absorbs the shock. And she told you that when she let it go, only gravity drew the gun down to the ground. But Mr. Monahan told you when he's walking and shuffling, and he hits that nail, and he stumbles, and the gun thumps on the rail or the post, he didn't drop it. It was the force of his entire body behind it. If I drop a basketball, only gravity takes it down. But if I dribble it, it's got the force of my body behind it too. It's a stronger force. And remember, she told you, DMV records show he's 5'11", and the railing, 36 inches high. Almost 3 feet with the force of his body behind it. Not just the gravity drop that she did onto a rubber mat. Did you notice? Well, again, then she sits there and tells you it's not a defective gun, even though she knows this can happen. Did you notice that not one police officer said, "I think that would be safe. I'm okay with a gun that goes off when you drop it"? Why do you think none of them were asked that question? And while you're deliberating, I ask you to think of this. Officer Cannell, would you mind bringing the gun over, please? Perfect. Actually, there you go, halfway, right there. Imagine you load a round in, and you rack it, a live round. Now, I'm not going to ask him to do it, but you rack it, and that firing pin is hooked into the sear. Do you have confidence that if he drops it now, it won't blow a hole in the roof, in the ceiling? Are you confident beyond a reasonable doubt that if he drops it right now, it doesn't shoot a hole in the ceiling? If you're not confident beyond a reasonable doubt, then the law and your oath commands a not guilty verdict. I ask you to think a little about what occurred at the Monahan residence that evening. They weren't sitting at the kitchen table having a cup of coffee when they came up the driveway. 8 o'clock. Rural setting, by all respects, quiet and bucolic. They're sound asleep, and they get awoken by the sound of the motorcycle roaring up the driveway. Kevin sits up, walks to the edge of the loft and looks down into the main floor through those floor-to-ceiling windows that you saw. He sees what he sees, and he comes back, and he wakes up Jinx. Get up, get dressed. There are people here. I don't know what this is. And he walks downstairs onto the first floor, and he looks out those windows. And he can see. Now, he goes down without a gun. He can see Mr. Bain on his motorcycle over near his van. And he can see the two SUVs parked side by side, blocking the driveway. The only way of leaving this house for this old man and this old woman. And he goes back upstairs, and he checks on Jinx. And he tells her, get in the closet, hide here, don't come out until I get you. He hands her her gun and some bullets, and he gets his, and he loads 3 rounds, and he goes downstairs. And while he's going downstairs, things are percolating in his mind. He remembers that he called 911 before, and no one showed up. He remembers that there have been a lot of break-ins, especially at seasonal places out at Casiuna Lake, only minutes from the house. Smash and grabs. He remembers that his neighbor had a similar experience where people broke in, beat the man and woman, tied them up, and robbed the house. And he remembers the nearest police are 15 to 20 minutes away. And whatever those people in the SUVs have planned, it's going to be done, and they're going to be long gone before the police finally arrive. And although he didn't know it then, you know now that because of the way 911 addresses are dished out, even if you call the police, they might go to the wrong address. So he goes outside, and he looks, and he sees Mr. Bain, and he sees the SUVs. And he told you that he's shuffling, and he's walking, and he's shuffling, and he's looking at them, and he strikes the nail. And it causes him to lurch and thump that gun. Now, remember, when he's on the stand, Mr. Morris asked him, here's a photo. Do you see that nail pop? No, I can't see it. It's too blurry. I'm showing you Exhibit 37, photo 220. Here's a nail pop right here. Right there. Although I didn't highlight it for you. Here are two more. Now, I am not telling you those are the nails that he stumbled against, he hit his flip-flop against. I'm not telling you that. In fact, I'm telling you the opposite. They are not. They're at a different part on the deck. But I offer them to you so that you can see this can happen. These nails can pop. The photo from the prosecution, from the police, wasn't clear enough to show you the area where he stumbled and fell. But you know this can happen. So he goes outside and he sees Mr. Bain and he sees the two SUVs. And you hear from the prosecution witnesses what I'll call changed evidence and fake evidence. You heard some proof about the alcohol and marijuana. That is not offered to suggest in any way that any of these, and I'll use a combining term, any of these kids in the vehicles, because that's what they are, they're kids. Any of these kids in the vehicles to suggest in any way that it was their fault for getting lost. It wasn't. If any one of them is blaming themselves, they should stop now, because this wasn't their fault. It's not offered to show that. It is offered to show you that maybe their recollection of events isn't as clear as it might ordinarily have been. And it's not disturbing that their versions differ from one another, don't completely mesh. That's to be expected. Because up until that memorable event on the driveway, there was nothing memorable about their trip. It was one of a million. Why wouldn't it? Why would it be memorable? I'm guessing you don't remember the details of your trip here today. Why would you? It's not memorable. So it's not disturbing that their details don't mesh. But it is disturbing that they are willing to change their stories to fit the prosecution narrative. As an example, Ms. Nadolski, she told you, I saw two SUVs and a motorcycle, and I made note of that because that was unusual. But that's not what she told the police. What she told the police was not two SUVs and a motorcycle, but two motorcycles and an SUV. And lest you think she was confused, she wrote it down on her Post-it notes. She wrote it down twice. She wasn't mistaken. She changed her testimony to fit the prosecution narrative. Mr. Walsh told you when he testified on direct that they came up the driveway, they started their three-point turn. They were actually in the second leg of it when the lights come on and he hears the shot. But that's not what he told the police. What he told the police was the two vehicles were stationary down by the telephone pole when the lights come on. Mr. Bain is down there with him. And then he hears the shot. But he changed his testimony to fit the prosecution narrative. Mr. Bain himself told you that he didn't go roaring up that driveway 10 to 15 miles an hour. But then on cross-examination, he said, I was in third gear. And to be in third gear, you have to be going at least 25 miles an hour, maybe as much as 60. If he was going less than that 25, he would have stalled out going up the driveway. But he didn't. And he only stalled out at the top because he ran out of time and he ran out of driveway. And he couldn't downshift without stalling. But he changed his testimony to fit the prosecution narrative. And Ms. Whiting, she told you on direct that the man on the deck, Mr. Monahan, we know that now, that the man on the deck held the gun kind of horizontal out toward our cars. That's not what she told the police within hours of this happening. She said the man on the deck fired a shot into the air. And I pressed her a little on cross-examination. I said to her, that's not what you told the police, is it? No, it isn't. I said to her, you told the police he fired a shot in the air, right? Yes, I did. And the reason you told the police that was because that's what really happened, right? Yeah, that's what really happened. He fired a shot in the air. But she changed her testimony to fit the prosecution narrative. Now, why is that important? Remember in the beginning, Mr. Morris told you that he would show recklessness and depravity. And the way he would do it was by showing that Mr. Monahan fired 2 shots at those vehicles. But Alex Whiting's testimony, what really happened was he fired in the air, eviscerates that. And she changed her testimony to fit the prosecution narrative. That's the changed evidence. Let's talk about the fake evidence. I'm going to lump 3 of them together. The fingerprints, the DNA, the gunshot residue. Fingerprints. Trooper Gabler got on the stand and told you about that. And a word about Trooper Gabler. He is not an expert. Mr. Morris has agreed and the judge has ordered. He's not an expert. He's just some guy. He knows no more about fingerprints than you or I do. He is not an expert in fingerprints. And what he told you was, I looked at the gun, I looked for 2 kinds of prints. Patent prints and latent prints. Patent prints, we all know, if you have a glass tabletop or a window or a cell phone screen, you touch it, you can see the fingerprint. It's obvious. It's patent. He didn't see any of those. No surprise. This isn't glass. This is wood. It's porous. No surprise. He looked for latent patent fingerprints. Those are the kind you have to develop with that special bichromatic powder that he told you about. And he dusted and he told you, I didn't find any latent fingerprints either. Not so fast. Remember I showed him the photo. This is photo 994. I don't know how well it comes out on here. I'll try to blow it up for you. Remember I said, Trooper, you see all those black smudgy marks? That's from the oils from fingerprints, right? couldn't say that they were for fingerprints. Wrong button. He couldn't say that they were for fingerprints. But he did say they were from the oils that you typically leave with a fingerprint. So it's not that there were no fingerprints there. It's just that there were no fingerprints of evidentiary value. Well, big surprise. You touch a piece of wood, if you press, it might leave one. But if you swirl or slide or swipe, you're not going to find a patent fingerprint. You're going to find the oils, which his bichromatic powder revealed. But I think the implication you're supposed to draw is Kevin knew he was in hot water, and so he wiped off the gun, but just did a lousy job at it because he smeared the prints but didn't remove the oils that would evidence the prints. It's not that there were no fingerprints there. It's that there were no fingerprints of evidentiary value. Let's talk about the DNA. Ms. Caruso got on the stand and she told you about that. And remember her chart, 24 different loci, and you had to match them. And she checked 5 samples, 4 from the gun, 1 from the shell that they found in the bedroom. And of those 4, she told you only 1 could she find a DNA match. And it was Mr. Monahan's. Big surprise. And as to the other 3, she said, no match. Not so fast. We looked at her chart, 24 spots. And I asked her, how many spots do you need? How many loci do you need for a match? And she said, well, with a mixed sample like this, I need 12 before I can declare a match. I need 12. And I asked her, well, all you can say really, not that there's no genetic material at all, but that there just aren't 12 for you to see, right? Yes. 3 of the 4, that's what she said. And I suppose the implication is supposed to be that with surgical precision, Mr. Monahan removed at least 13, in at least 13 loci, he removed the genetic material. So she was frustrated and couldn't declare a match. Now I asked her, are there ways to chemically remove it, like bleach or peroxide? Yes. Did you find evidence of bleach or peroxide? No. Did you look for it? No. Did you ask for a better sample from those 3 spots? No. Could you have? Yes. Did you ask to get your own samples? No. Could you have? Yes. Again, the implication is that he destroyed enough genetic material where she just couldn't say there were 12. Maybe 2, maybe 11, maybe 6, maybe 9. You don't know. She didn't testify about that. And then something very curious happened. As we stood at the bench discussing, Ms. Caruso blurts out, all of my testimony is wrong. Because you don't need 12, you actually need 8. I was wrong, my testimony is wrong, that's their DNA expert. Just because she's offering expert testimony doesn't mean you have to accept her as an expert. Doesn't mean you have to accept her conclusions. You decide what the facts are. You're the sole judges of the facts. You can disregard her testimony just like anybody else's testimony. Finally, the gunshot residue. The information that you had was from Ms. O'Connor, where she said, I checked the gun, I checked the bore, there was no gunshot residue. And the implication you're supposed to draw is he somehow removed it. But there was no testimony about that. And you know what else was missing? Ms. O'Connor never said there was no gunshot residue, and there should have been. There should have been gunshot residue, and because it's not there, that tells me someone removed it. All she said was, I didn't find any. The last one, the wadding and the shell casing. We heard from a couple witnesses about the search for the wadding. I could be wrong on the name. I think it was Investigator Spezio. But one of the witnesses said, we checked a 30 by 20 area, 600 square feet. Couldn't find the wadding. Now, he acknowledged shotgun wadding will travel a certain amount of distance when you fire the gun. He doesn't know how far. 150 feet? I don't know. 100 feet? I don't know. 50 feet? I don't know. But he was sure it could. And so he looked in 600 square feet. Couldn't find it. And then Trooper Gabler told us not 600 square feet, 60,000 square feet. An acre and a third they searched, looking for wadding. Now, we don't have a precise measurement how big this is. We have the diameter of a nickel or a dime from, I think, Spezio. And a shotgun shell, what is it, about 3 inches? Well, part of that is the shot, and part of that is the powder. So it's obviously less than 3 inches. And in 60,000 square feet, they couldn't find it. Now remember what Trooper Gabler told you. It comes in all sorts of colors. Red, brown, white, yellow, green. They're searching a green field, 60,000 square feet, and they can't find it. And the inference you're supposed to draw is that when they have 6 or 7 or 8 guys right next to each other, walking a grid pattern in a line, they can't find it. But somehow, in the middle of the night, in the dark, this man sneaks out, steals out into the grounds, finds 2 shotgun waddings, hides them, conceals them, or destroys them. That's what you're supposed to believe. Here's the problem with that. They told you there is no evidence. They had no information whatsoever that anyone went outside the Monahan residence from the time of the 911 call until the time law enforcement arrived. Nobody went outside. What does that leave? That leaves the time from the second shot to the 911 call. And there's no evidence that anybody went out that time either. Now, we do have the stipulation of the parties. We stipulated that had she been called, Tara Smith would have said she could see small lights moving around at the residence. Not outside, at the residence. There is no proof whatsoever that Mr. Monahan, or even Jinx Monahan, went outside and grabbed that wadding in that 60,000 square foot area in the dark without lights. Isn't it more likely that either A, the police did a lousy job looking for it, or B, probably more likely, they just couldn't find it because they're looking in 60,000 square feet? Isn't that more likely? And then there's the shell casing, and this is the strangest twist of all. We heard that when you fire and then you rack to load a new round, that the first shell ejects out of the gun, and it can travel a certain distance. Nobody was clear how far that would be, but they were clear that it can travel, and that if it lands the right way, it can bounce and travel even farther. And you're supposed to believe that when Mr. Monahan fires that warning shot in the air and then racks the gun to load a new round and eject that shell, and then stumbles, his flip-flop hitting the nail, and the gun goes off, you're supposed to believe that after all that was done, he knew he was in hot water, he comes outside, gets that one shell, alters, conceals, or destroys it, and then when he's up in his bedroom, takes out the second shell and puts it on his dresser. Now we know now that it was that second shell that hurt Kayla. Why would he save that? If his intent was to destroy, alter, or conceal evidence, a shotgun shell, and I suppose the wadding, why would he save that one and leave it on his dresser, right next to his bed, right next to the gun that fired it? It makes no sense. And one more thing, it reminds me when I say fires the shot in the air and then stumbles and the gun goes off. Remember Ms. O'Connor's drop test? She said she wasn't sure about the safety, so she scrapped the whole test and redid it. Was there anybody who told you at any point that after the shot in the air, he put the safety on and then came over here and stumbled and thumped that gun and it went off? Of course he didn't. It wouldn't make any sense. Because from his perspective, the threat level is still rising. Because those vehicles, once stationary, came back up, came up the driveway, closer and closer and closer, and nestled in right underneath his deck. Changed evidence and fake evidence. Now, I don't know. The way our system works, when I sit down, I'm done. I don't get to get back up and respond to what Mr. Morris says. So I don't know if he's going to play the 911 call, so I'll address it now. In a word, it was heartbreaking. It was gut-wrenching. Anybody who is not moved by that call has a heart of stone. But as emotional as it was, it doesn't fill in the holes in their case. It doesn't change the mindset that Kevin Monahan had that night. There are many things that we know now that he didn't know then. We know now that they were teenagers and not a group of marauders. But he didn't know that. He looks down the driveway and he sees two SUVs, and how many people could be in there? Maybe 10. And he just doesn't know. And we know now that they just drove up the wrong driveway. But he doesn't know that because they're not acting like lost people. And we know now that they were looking for a party and not a house to break into. But he didn't know that. In the words of Jinx, we thought we were being invaded. He didn't know. And maybe you will think that it was dumb for him to go outside instead of calling 911. And maybe it was. And maybe you will think it was dumb for him to go outside with a loaded shotgun. And maybe it was. And maybe you will think it was dumb for him to be walking along that rail with a gun that can go off when no one pulls the trigger. And maybe it was. We have a word for that. That word is not depraved. That word is not reckless. That word is negligent. Doing something that a reasonably prudent person wouldn't do. Or not doing something that a reasonably prudent person would do. Not depraved. Not that evil, wicked, blackened heart. Not reckless. Failing to, or appreciating a risk and disregarding it, simply not caring. Negligent. Dumb. You know he didn't do this on purpose. He's not accused of intentionally killing this girl. You know he didn't shoot her on purpose. He's not accused of that. He's accused of acting with an evil, wicked, blackened heart, an utter disregard for the value of life, wantonly. And recklessly. Not of killing her on purpose. We have a word for what he is. Negligent. When you get the verdict sheet, you will see that there are some new charges. You came in here with 3. Murder, reckless endangerment in the first degree, tampering with evidence. There are 2 new charges for you to consider in the alternative. In the alternative to murder, you can consider manslaughter. In the alternative to reckless endangerment in the first degree, you can consider reckless endangerment in the second degree. And then, of course, there's the tampering charge. We'll set that aside. I know it's football season. I'm a baseball fan. I'm a Red Sox fan. And when the Red Sox star slugger, Rafael Devers, goes up to the plate, if he goes 4 for 5, or 3 for 5, even 2 for 5, he's had a good night at the plate. Kevin's not here to go 2 for 5, or 3, or even 4. He's here to go 5 for 5. When he pled not guilty, he said, I'm not guilty of all of this. I may be negligent. I may be dumb. But I don't have that evil, wicked, blackened heart. And I wasn't reckless. I was dumb. So, the question will be for you. Ask yourselves. Ask each other. If he really wanted, if he really had this evil, wicked heart, this black heart, why not kill Rory Bain when he's 20 feet away? If he really has this evil, wicked, blackened heart, why not fire at those 2 SUVs that are right down in the driveway when they're stationary? If he really has this evil, wicked, blackened heart, why not shoot at the SUVs when they come up and they back up to do that 3-point turn and they're nestled right underneath the rail, right underneath his deck, 15, 20 feet away? They're sitting ducks. Why not fire and fire again and fire a 3rd time and reload? If he really has this evil, wicked, blackened heart. Why fire a warning shot in the air at all? If he has this evil, wicked, blackened heart. Why wait until they're leaving which is what he wanted in the first place, why wait until they're leaving to then shoot at a moving target that's getting farther and farther and farther away? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense unless the answer is because he didn't want to shoot anyone. And he didn't. Because this gun will fire when no one pulls the trigger. Just like it did at the state police lab, as Ms. O'Connor told you. So, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that mean? The judge is going to give you the law. He doesn't need my help. But I will say this. It's the kind of doubt that people would have in matters of this importance. What's a matter of this importance? How sure do you have to be that your retirement is safe at the bank? How sure do you have to be the brakes in your car work? How sure do you have to be about the people who are watching your kids? Isn't it at least as important as those things? How sure do you have to be? How sure do you have to be that that gun won't shoot a hole in the ceiling or down through the floor if Officer Canale dropped it? Think of reasonable doubt. Think of proof beyond a reasonable doubt as a frozen lake. Think of all the things we brought you. Changed evidence, fake evidence, a gun that will shoot when no one pulls the trigger, and whether it makes any sense that he would fire at a vehicle that was leaving, which is what he wanted. Think of all those things as cracks in that frozen ice. Would you walk on that ice? Would you let your kids? I suggest to you, if the answer to either one of those is no, then you have a reasonable doubt. And if you do, your oath and the law commands that you find him not guilty. I told you in the beginning that when we got here, I would ask you to say two words. Not guilty. Because this was a terrible accident. And you, the jury, have realized that by now. Thank you.
Let's take about a 5-10 minute break.
All rise for the jury exiting. Thank you. We are in recess.
Unfortunately, I have a 12:30 Teams conference, which I
If I
might.
could hurry up.
No. It's only 10:38. I'm not worried about you going for 2 hours. I just. It is about 2 hours. I better call Kim and tell her.
I do have some jurisdiction on the situation.
I just called Kim.
Okay, I didn't have my problem with last one.
Well,
Don't want you to.
No. I just called Kim over the board and for us to say I'm going to put them on the That's fine. This is obviously top priority.
I think we might break this one. I think we're supposed to
Judge, do you intend to break in any structure? I just told for the team, just told Kim to call it. Yeah, so I'm not gonna be there 12:30. That's fine. I said call support from Jennifer, support, obviously, doesn't operate. So, no worries.
They'll figure it out without you.
They'll figure it out.
Middle.
Doesn't matter. All right, we're back on the record. Cases of people of the state of New York against Kevin Monahan, Attorney Morrison, Attorney Thornton, here for the people, Attorney Ross, and Attorney Not here for Mr. Monahan. All of you present in court, and we are about to call in the jury.
rise for the jury entry. Jury is present, properly seated. You may be seated.
Attorney Morris?
Thank you. Kevin Monahan murdered Kalen Gillis. He shot a 20-gauge shotgun with a rifled hollow point slug. I had to present the evidence to you, and over the next little bit, I'm going to show you how that all adds up. How it adds up to murder in the second degree, reckless endangerment in the first degree, and tampering with evidence. We're going to cover all the material as much as I can here, because this is a matter of great importance. But I want to give you the roadmap of what I'm doing so you know where we're at in this. I'm going to cover the timeline first. Now, the timeline in this case is critical. It's crucial. It's the standard by which you measure everything else in this case as the jurors. Then we're going to cover the facts of the case, what happened. Then I'm going to turn to what Kevin Monahan and Jinx Monahan said on this stand, and we're going to expose it for what it was. Then I'm going to review the law with you. When I do that, please understand, the judge is the judge of the law. If there is any difference from what I say to what he says, you follow what he says. But I have to explain to you how these facts apply to the law. So I got to tell you what that is. And then we'll conclude. So let's go through the time frame. April 15th, 2023. It's between 9 and 9:15. Kaylin, Blake, Alex, Jacob, Rory, Catherine, and Max. We know that they had been at the house prior. We know that they leave. And they leave Blake's house in center Cambridge and they head to the town of Hebron. We know at 9:45 and 45 seconds, all three vehicles turn onto Patterson Hill Road. Now this is going to be the video of Monica Bazan's camera. It hasn't been played yet, but I'm going to play it for you. And it has timestamps, and you're going to see the timestamps. When the vehicles come back by, it's now 9:53. When they go back by Monica Bazan's house at the intersection of Route 30 and Patterson Hill Road. That means the entirety of the events at Patterson Hill Road occur in less than 5 minutes total time. 5 minutes. Now, before I play this, I want to point some things out to you here. You can tell by the map that we looked at that this camera is facing away from Route 30 intersection and up Patterson Hill Road. What you see in the upper portion here is a vehicle, and what you'll see come next is a motorcycle, and then another vehicle. I'm going to play it 2 to 3 times so that you can get adjusted to it. 1, you'll see it this way. 2, get adjusted to what you see. 3, listen. Those vehicles drove by just a few seconds before 9:46:01 in this upper right-hand corner. We'll play it again. First vehicle, motorcycle, second vehicle. One more time for the sound. Listen to the motorcycle. When we get to it, that's the sound Kevin Monahan said woke him up. That's the sound he said that got him sitting up on his bed to watch what happens on Patterson Hill Road. This is now the return camera. I want to point out what you're looking at first because I have to play it a few times. Right here in the lower left, you see these lights shining back up towards the road. Those are the tail lights. The tail lights of the Explorer where Kalen Gillis is dead. Blake is driving. Behind him, back here, this light will come into focus. This is Catherine Rondu and Max Barney coming after. This timestamp will be in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll tell you that, but I want you to watch this again 3 times. Get oriented the first time, watch it the second time, and listen the third time. Those lights disappeared because they go to the intersection. Here comes the second car. Play it again. One more time. About halfway through, you're going to hear someone yell, "Blake." Now you remember Jill Nadowski that was down by the intersection across the road from the street from this house. She told you that when they got there, she heard some yelling. That's the yelling she heard. The time frame, we also have to deal with the 911 calls. Now this is admitted in as a part of People's Exhibit 1. I'm going to go through these calls and break them out so it's visually easier to see, but this is People's Exhibit 1. And this lists all the telephone audio recordings from the area of 1263 Patterson Hill Road. Now I also put in what was Exhibit 2. In Exhibit 2 are all the phone numbers associated with those calls. And the reason this is in later, you're going to understand, is there's only 2 calls that Kevin Monahan made to 911. That's it. Even though he claimed he made more and spoke more. You can verify there are no recorded calls other than the ones we have recorded here. So the 911 calls. At 9:50:59, just moments after they passed that intersection of Route 30 and Patterson Hill Road, there's the first dropped call by the teens in Blake's Explorer. At 9:52:05 is the second dropped call by the teens in Blake's Explorer. At 9:52:26, which is 20 seconds after that second call, Communications Officer Kelsey Carpenter told you she called them and left a message. That's in evidence. You can listen to her message. Less than a minute later, the teens were able to connect in Blake's Explorer to 911 and speak with Kelsey. This call lasts 9 minutes. You only need to listen to that call once. It's not just what was going on in the car that you need to focus in on that. That was harrowing enough. But focus If you listen to it again, you got to focus on what did they say happened. We pulled in a driveway and someone started shooting at us. It was that quick. Their explanation in the moment, in that immediate instance, was we pulled into a driveway and someone started shooting. You're going to find out that's exactly what happened. At 9:54 and 11 seconds, Jill Nadowski reports vehicles going up Patterson Hill Road, hearing 2 gunshots, and vehicles coming back down Patterson Hill Road. Now, while she's sitting there at her kitchen table looking to the right over her shoulder as they go up, maybe she got what vehicles they were wrong. She knows that there was at least 1 SUV and at least 1 motorcycle and a 3rd vehicle. But then ask yourself, why would she really take note of any more detail than that? She's just sitting in her kitchen doing work when curious 3 cars go by. How much more exacting information would you require of her? If anything, that's the kind of memory you expect someone to have. The shotgun blasts are what's important. They were fast, right in a row. That they came right back by. That she heard that yelling has all been verified by what we just saw on the Bassan house camera. At 9:58, Scott Smith reports vehicles going up Patterson Hill Road, pulling into the Monahan residence, hearing 2 gunshots, and then watching vehicles leave. That's consistent with the Monica Bassan camera time frame. In fact, he tells you it was 9:45 and 9:50. At 10:05:51, Smith calls back again in 911 and says that he sees vehicles coming back up Patterson Hill Road, but past the Monahan residence. What he sees is another SUV, Rory Bain in the middle, and then another vehicle behind that. And Rory explained that to you. When he got lost from the group, he contacted Nathan Twitchell. He met up with Rory just into the village of Hebron, and they all traveled back up to Joey Carey's house. So to Scott Smith, who doesn't know any of that, he just saw an SUV, a motorcycle, and SUV go up to the Monahan residence, 2 gunshots, they come back down, and by 10:05 he sees 3 vehicles essentially matching what he just saw go back up. So of course he reports even that. Now that's right in line with what Rory said. Those are consistent. You see, the time frame is the measuring stick that we need for all the facts of this case. At 10:19:52, Smith calls again to report that the police are at the Matthews residence, not the Monahan residence. And we know that Officer Nussbaum from Cambridge was responding up to help in Hebron. Just address this for a minute. Mr. Frost has made a great deal about how poor Washington County's law enforcement is. It takes them such a long time. They don't know where they're going. You'll never know if they ever respond, if they do at all. Officer Nussbaum in Cambridge responds to the town of Hebron. Officer Nelson from Cambridge Greenwich responds to Hebron. The sheriffs respond to Hebron. The state police respond to Hebron. All available agencies go, even beyond their jurisdictions, to get to this call. That's the effort of law enforcement in this case. Officer Nussbaum put the address in his GPS, and it was the GPS that brought him to the wrong location. Nussbaum indicates that when he saw Mark Nelson at the Monahan residence, it was within a couple of minutes of having arrived at the Matthews residence. Now this is important because we need to get a time frame of approximately when Nelson first pulls into that U of the driveway and shines a spotlight on the Monahan residence. So a couple of minutes, 10:19 from Mr. Smith's call. It's approximately 10:22 when Officer Nelson is now in the driveway of the Monahan residence. Almost 10 minutes later, Kevin Monahan calls 911 to inquire if the police are responding to a call to his residence. This call lasts 18 minutes. Right? This means Officer Nelson and Nussbaum had been talking with Kevin Monahan for about 19 minutes before he calls 911 as he came in and out of the residence 4 to 5 times. At 10:41, Sergeant Murray arrives at 1263 Patterson Hill Road. Sergeant Murray testified that Kevin Monahan came out when he was there another 4 to 5 times after he arrived. 10 times he comes out onto that deck. And so I'll say it here. Not once is it reported that he tripped. Not once did he come out in those officers and trip and fall on the nail. The nail by which, later I'll show you, doesn't exist. 10:56 and 23 seconds, Kevin calls 911 back. That call lasts a minute. At 11:07, Officer Carpenter from 911 calls Monahan back. This lasts approximately 2 minutes. Half an hour later, when Under Sheriff Winchell arrives, the group of officers go up to the house and Sergeant Murray speaks with Kevin Monahan and Jinx Monahan on their porch. And it wasn't until approximately 1:30 in the morning that Kevin Monahan and Jinx Monahan come out of the house into the custody of the New York State Police Special Operations Response Team and the Washington County Sheriff's Department. So from the arrival of the police to the time Kevin Monahan is in custody is over 3 hours. So now we want to narrow in our time frame. 5 minutes. So how long does that leave at the house by the kids? 9:45 and 47 seconds, they go by. 9:50 and 53 seconds, they come back. We know that Senior Investigator Spezio, along with Investigator Earl, drove up Patterson Hill Road to observe the nighttime conditions and the time frame from Route 30 to Kevin Monahan's driveway, which was approximately 1 minute. This is People's Exhibit 18. This is that drive. Pausing it right there because they went on to Hebron Hills Road, which we'll address in a moment. But right here, that's approximately 1 minute. This is a zoomed in portion of People's Exhibit 7. If you were to take this curved driveway and you were to fold that back out distance-wise, that would get you pretty close to Route 30 by distance, just even by your site right there. So that's at least 45 more seconds or another minute. And so what we'll do is we'll err on the side of caution here and say 45 seconds, less time, though it was likely more. That means when you look at 9:45 and 47 seconds to 9:50:53, that's 5 minutes and 6 seconds. When you subtract the minute to the driveway, the 45 seconds up the driveway, the 45 seconds down the driveway, and the minute back to Route 30, that only leaves 1 minute and 30 seconds, or 90 seconds. And if we pause for a minute and say, well, maybe they went faster up the driveway or faster down the driveway, slower up, faster down. You got to remember they stopped at the end of the driveway too, and there was a discussion at the end of the driveway, so that takes some time. So these are approximates, and even erring on the side of caution, we're at 90 seconds. You can't cook popcorn in 90 seconds. This whole case took place in 90 seconds. That's what you have to measure, everything that everyone says. Now, there are few things in life we know with absolute certainties, and we look at that video of Monica Bazan and those 911 calls. We've hedged it in with certainty. This is our time frame. We're going to go through a couple more time frames. Between 9:50 and 10:22, 9:50 being when the kids go by Route 30, to 10:22 when Officer Nelson arrives at the 1263 residence. On the left, the teens, multiple attempts to contact 911. 911 tries to contact them. The teens connect with 911. They're frantic, they're panicked, they're lost. They have a dying friend. They have their hand over the gunshot wound, and they're doing CPR until the first responders arrive. What's Kevin Monahan doing during that time frame? We know the lights get turned off at the residence. Tara Smith says that in the stipulation. Kevin Monahan admitted it. We know that there's flashlights moving around at the residence. At the residence. Not in, at the residence. Tara Smith was down the hill looking up at a dark residence and saw small lights. And just so we're sure that they had flashlights, People's Exhibit 37, photo 19, there's a flashlight. People's 37, photo 319, you can see that flashlight right in the middle, right by the papers. Those are the two flashlights that they moved around with. Between 10:22 and 1:30, this is the officers at the residence and what the teens were still doing. Kaylin Gillis was pronounced dead in that time frame. All the teens were taken to the police barracks. Their family arrived at the barracks. Police were getting statements from the teens. The police took Max back to the scene to confirm the location, and they were getting search warrants. The kind of police activity you expect in this kind of case. Meanwhile, those kids were subjected to having to give depositions after doing CPR on their friend like that, after being shot at, immediately after. And we'll address their credibility issue in a moment, whether or not they fabricated nefariously testimony for me in this trial, or was the difference in their statements going through that experience. Meanwhile, up at the Monahan residence, the police are trying to talk with Kevin as he comes in and out 4 to 5 times. Kevin is calling 911. He comes in and out 4 or 5 more times. The police continue to talk with him, go up to the porch, and ultimately he's in custody at 1:30. Those are all our time frames. Now we're going to look at all the facts and how they fit into those time frames. Kaylin was 20, Blake was 19, Alex was 18, Jacob 19, Rory 20, Catherine 18, and Max 16. Kids, teens, young adults. They were getting together at Blake's house to have an evening there. They were intending on staying there for the whole evening. It would only make sense that at that age, alcohol and marijuana was what they were going to do as they sat on the back porch of Blake's parents' house. When they get a text about going to Joey Carey's house in Hebron for another party or get-together, and they decide to go up there. At approximately 9 and 9:15, they leave and head north. In the Jeep was Catherine and Max, and the motorcycle was Rory, Blake, Kaylin, and Alex and Jacob in the Explorer. We're all familiar with this after a 2-week trial. This map that we have Hebron Village over here on the right, Route 30 in Patterson Hill. They drove in and they went up the Monahan residence. Now, as they went up to Monahan residence, I want you to observe something. And we're going to see it when we get back to Investigator Spezio's video. If I can have the lights dimmed so we can make sure we see this. People's Exhibit 18. I'm going to pause it at several points. Pause it right here. What you see is a red barn on the left, and this fence with a house that just was out of sight as it came right to this frame. That's the Smith house. So we have a red barn on the left, and we have a house on the right as we're going down a dark dirt road. We're going to continue on. That was the Monahan driveway. And if the kids had kept continuing on, this is what they would have seen. They would have seen a red barn on the left and a house on the right. So by landmark, identical. And that was Hebron Hills Road. That was the dirt road that they were supposed to take. I want to show you something on the overhead now. Plastic coating over People's Exhibit 7, and I'm going to trace the path that they went. To the left now we have Patterson Hill and Route 30. They came in this way. They drove up Patterson Hill. When they got here, they passed a red barn and a house. They continued until there was a sharp turn back and right and up a hill. And then it went left. And that came to a house. If they had gone on, they would have passed a red barn and a house. They would have continued on, they turned back right, a dirt road, up a hill, and gone left to the house they were supposed to go at. Let's see it without the map. This way. When we say they were lost, they were lost. By memory, Catherine Rondo had been there a dozen times before when she was 13 and younger. So by landmark, by shape, by everything that she could use that night, she went to the house she thought was the right house. They weren't marauding raiders ripping up that driveway. They thought that they were at Joey Carey's house, owned by Zach Bramer. They thought they were going to see this two-story wood-sided house with a large front porch. But when they arrived, that's People's Exhibit 5, when they arrived, they saw this large two-story wooden house with a big porch. Everything told them they were in the right house. But when they didn't see those lights, and they recognized that this house isn't exactly that house, they stopped. They stopped because that's what lost people do. A quick aside, the blame shift by Mr. Frost and Mr. Monahan, that they didn't act lost, is insulting. Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
To the facts of this case. Let's assess the credibility of the teen's witness before we go on to hear what they have to say. The question to consider is, if there were inconsistencies by or among witnesses, were they significant inconsistencies related to important facts, or instead were the kind of minor inconsistencies that one might expect from multiple witnesses to the same event? Recall jury selection, that vacation a year ago, people describing it. Would they get every detail right? Recalling a happy event? No. There would be inconsistencies, and you would expect that. You'd be a little cautious if everything lined up. But if we add here that each had different focuses, some were driving, some were passengers, some were looking at their phone, some were talking with other passengers. They had different vantage points based on where they were located and what they looked at and whether their window was open. In other words, any variance in their testimony is expected. Now, you saw them testify. You have to determine, are they the nefarious liars portrayed just moments ago up on that stand, twisting fabricated facts to help my case? Or were the type of inconsistencies from their statement to what they said on the stand the type that you would expect them to have? And we'll go through this in a minute, but let's do the shot in the air right now. In her statement, it was, he shot in the air. There is a 24-foot height difference from where he stood and where she was at when he shot at her. She looked back over her left shoulder through the rear of the vehicle. That's important, because her back was facing him. So any shot he makes is in the air. And she told you the officer didn't ask her to describe it, but she described it for you. I submit to you that when you consider what you saw of these individuals on that stand, and when you consider their testimony in the context of the time frames, you'll find they're all consistent. There's no credibility issue at all. We're talking about an incident that took place less than 90 seconds. They were fired upon for being at the wrong house. Several were hit with shrapnel. They just witnessed their friend get struck in the neck. They rendered aid to their friend by putting hands on her neck and performing CPR. They were whisked away with police officers and gave statements at crowded police barracks. One was even driven back to the scene in the middle of his statement. Compare their testimony to Monica Bassan's camera, to Jill Nadowski's 911 call, to Scott's 911 call, and his testimony on the stand. They are all consistent with each other in every major and nearly every minor way. When you really break it down, there's no major inconsistency, only the type you might expect. The teens were lost. They were not high. They were not drunk. They were not rowdy partiers. They were not arrogant and disrespectful. When they didn't recognize the house, they stopped. That's what you do when you're lost. You're respectful of the people in the house. They stopped immediately when they didn't recognize their surroundings, and they looked for directions and contacted friends. So in that vehicle, several phones are on, illuminating their faces, obvious lost people. We know the order of the vehicles. This has been drilled into us through this trial. That doesn't change. Each team testified to this order. Scott Smith testified to this, and the Vassan camera shows it. The Vassan camera coming back doesn't have the motorcycle, and that's explained by Rory. He was delayed in coming back because they had gotten ahead of him. So you would expect only 2 cars in that recording. The vehicle's at 1263 Patterson Hill Road. Every team said just above the telephone pole area. Scott Smith says just above the telephone area. Kevin Monahan admits they were at the telephone area. That's where they were at. Rory says he drove up to the south side, even with the house, and turned to come back down. It was a continuous motion except to restart the stall. Going up that hill in 3rd gear, he stalled out as he attempted to turn around. It's a U-turn on a motorcycle. He stalled it. He told you he put his hand on the electric start. He had to rev the throttle in order to restart it, put it down into first, and came back down. When he was asked later by me, he indicated that he went faster out of the driveway than when he came up. Remember that? He was faster down than he came up. And that makes sense. He hears gunshots. What did Kevin Monahan say? The exact opposite. He came fast up the driveway and went down the driveway as if he was out for a ride. Does that comport with the facts? The answer is no. Max, Jacob, Catherine, and Blake saw Rory go up to the house area and come back within approximately 20 seconds after passing. Jacob didn't see, Alex didn't see because she wasn't looking at the motorcycle. That's expected. Scott Smith says the motorcycle continued up the driveway gingerly and then came right back down even though he lost sight of it for a moment. That's about 20 to 30 seconds. Gingerly was his word. All right, now we're going to get to this later. The sound of that motorcycle. Kevin Monahan told you he was redlining the motorcycle repeatedly. I think if you add it up, it's over 12 times. Think of that motorcycle being revved with its RPMs to the max. How loud would that have been? On top of that mountain, top of that hill. No one reported loud motorcycles. Not the way Kevin Monahan described, and not in any other way. Kevin Monahan acknowledged that the motorcycle came up to the house and then back down to the cars. And this is where you're going to begin to see that Kevin has to admit things he can't deny. He can't deny that those kids were at his house. He can't deny that he used the shotgun. He can't deny that the shotgun was fired twice. There's so much that he can't deny, and he admitted it. But what he doesn't want to admit, he denies. And that's what you're going to find out. This we're all very familiar with. We're going to get better pictures in a moment. But this area, this is the telephone pole right here to the right, picture 6. This area is where all the cars were. Rory goes up, he turns around, and he comes back down. All continuous. Leaving. We're going to skip the moments of the shots here for a moment. Now we're going to go to leaving. Rory leaves first. Everyone agrees with that. The cars turn around and follow after. Rory and some of the others confirmed that Rory was already facing down the driveway and began to leave when the lights were on. Scott Smith confirms that Rory leaves first and the cars follow. And the defendant, Kevin Monahan, says the same thing. The Jeep and the Explorer going down the driveway. There is some variation with whether Catherine was first or Blake was first. And you have to determine your credibility of the witnesses. Is that the kind of thing that you would expect teenagers to not remember when they're getting shot at? Or do you think they're fabricating your testimony? And I submit to you it's the former, not the latter. They agree on the major event. They turned around and went down the driveway. You know, relative to Blake and pressing him as to whether he backed up or did a three-point turn while he was on the stand, Mr. Frost was doing that. You have to back up in a three-point turn. There's no inconsistency there. The vehicles stop at the bottom of the driveway. We know that for sure because they have to tell, Blake's car has to tell Catherine's car that Kaylin was shot and they need to get to a hospital. They continue to Route 30. They stop, yells after Blake. They switch because Catherine had the best idea of where they were at. She was going to take a lead, and they drove until 911 was able to get them to stop and send first responders. Rory, he turned up Patterson Hill Road, not knowing the severity of what happened, and he comes down, again, meets up with Twitchell and comes back. These are the 911 calls. These are Scott Smith 911 calls. I'm actually going to move on past this. You can listen to them. But I want to tell you, in the second call, when he reports that he just saw the cars go by, he says they were shooting, the whole incident took place up there, there were shots. 9:48 is what he says. There were shots at 9:48 to 9:50. Okay? 9:48 was what he remembered. When we get to the ultimate time frame, 9:48 is as accurate as it can be to what those facts are. Totally consistent. That would be why I play this slide, but I want to keep moving. Let's get to the gunshots at Patterson Hill Road. There were 2 shots fired by the defendant. Everyone agrees. Absolute certainty, 2 shots fired. The 2 shots were fired within 5 seconds of each other. Every teen indicated that the shots were fired within 5 seconds. Scott Smith, Jill Nadowski indicate the same thing. Now that's critically important. The only person that says that that wasn't the case is Kevin Monahan. And his time frame puts about 4 to 5 minutes between those shots. And we'll go through that. Everything else is 5 seconds. He came out onto this porch, out of the door on the north side. He walked out to this edge right here, the northeast corner of the house, where he stood. This gives you the height differential that we'll see from his vantage point, or just about from that northeast corner down to this area here. 24 feet, Amanda Puckett told you, investigator at FIU. 24 feet. He stood in the tactical advantage at his house. He had the high ground. He looked down 24 feet at those cars, nearly 80 feet away. It's almost 30 yards, longer than this courtroom. From their vantage point, looking up, as they sat there and looked at that house, that's where they stopped. They knew they were at the wrong house. And Rory going up to look to see if perhaps the party's on the other side of the house, 1 out of 3 cars to just double check, that makes sense. The lights turn on and the vehicles turn around. The way the testimony came out here, these things are essentially happening simultaneously. The decision is made to leave, the lights turn on, the vehicles turn around. If you were to synthesize everyone's testimony, it's all happening at the same time. Now, when you're asking these questions, you start to get the impression, did you pull forward into point 1? What did you do next? Did you pull, I looked over my shoulder, said Max. When you pulled into point 2, what did you do? I looked over my left shoulder, said Alex. It starts to give the impression that this is a long time. But it's a 3-point turn in your car. That's it. We're talking seconds of their life. When you ask the questions, what happened next, it gives the appearance as though you could lay it out and have the order perfect, and you ought to, because isn't it that important? Well, I submit to you, this is seconds of their lives. They were lost. They see a light come on. They know to leave. Goodness, this isn't the right house. We don't want to bother the people there. They leave. They do what you would expect them to do. The testimony is that when those kids were up there, that gunshot was fired within 20 seconds of the lights coming on. 20 seconds of the lights coming on. That means the lights are turned on at the door, and within 20 seconds, Kevin Monahan has walked out of his door, out to the northeast corner, looked down at that car, and fired the first shot. Totally contrary to what he said on the stand, consistent with what they said, consistent with what Scott Smith sees on this night looking up there. There go the cars up the hill. The motorcycle keeps going. What is this? Lights come on. 2 shots happen. It's all consistent with each other. I've got some stills here from the body camera of Sergeant Murray. Now, he indicated he wore a body camera. The video that was given to you is a portion of that camera. We know that he was there for well over 2 hours. This is about, ultimately, it's about 19 minutes. This is Sergeant Murray and Under Sheriff Winchell approaching the house. Now, the body camera is making that light really blurry because it's a camera. We'll see in a moment in a different still that the eye doesn't focus that way. It's not that blurry. But this gives you how, just even wearing a black shirt walking, this is how visible Under Sheriff Winchell is. This is them as they get even closer. This would have been the lighting that Kevin Monahan said he saw him under. And this is the deck. This is how bright it was up on the deck without glares from cameras. That's where he walked. He came out of this door right here and walked out to that corner down there. And that's where he stood in the light. And that's how they saw him. The first shot fired at the vehicles. All the teens, Scott Smith, Jill Nadowski, heard the first shot. Max sees a man standing out on the deck and a woman standing behind him in the window or the door area on the first floor. We'll come to that in a little bit. Alex sees the man standing on the deck with a shotgun in his hand. She sees the gun pointing in their direction. She looks over her left shoulder, which means her back was to him. To her, he was standing in the air. He's 24 feet above her position. She hears the gunfire around in their direction. She sees the flash of the light from the firing of the shotgun. Jacob, in his testimony, he heard something hit the car in the first shot. He said, like I heard something go up against the car. Now that's not the second shot. That's what he said about the first shot. That's also how you know he pointed it at their direction. What hit it, we don't know, but between Max, Alex, and Jacob, that gun was pointing at that car. They had reason to look. They had reason to observe, and those who could, did. Everyone in Blake's car was panicked at Jacob. Panicked. And Jacob yelled, I think somebody is shooting at us. Now, that's not a, hey, I think somebody's shooting at us. That's panic. Panic as they sat there, and that gun was fired in their direction. That gave him the impression it was at them. What he heard following the shot, what Alex saw, what Max saw. The second shot happens within 5 seconds of the first shot. Officer Canali, could you, even from there, just hold up the gun? Aimed, fired, put back in the up position, to use both hands to rack out, rack in another round, to pull it back out, to aim, and to pull the trigger a second time takes less than 5 seconds. That's what he did in between shots. 5 seconds. That comports with everything that you've heard so far. 5 seconds to do that shot right there. And actually, if you could come forward, just so I do this now, if you could turn the gun so they can see the ejection port on the right side of the gun. This right here is the ejection port, so that if this foregrip is racked up and down, the spent shell will get ejected out of that port. Now, would you hold the gun back in the position that you were? Officer Canale's left hand is down on the trigger, his right hand is on the foregrip. And if he were to eject a bullet out right now, a shell, this shell is going to come in this direction. It's not going on the deck and bouncing across the driveway and getting driven over by a bearcat. It's hitting him right in the chest, and it's falling right to the ground on an 8-foot deck. That shell is at his feet when he racks out that round and fires a second one. He doesn't even have to move to bend over and pick it up. Thank you. Blake, Alex, and Jacob hear the bullet hit the car and enter the Explorer. Jacob said it pierced the car and he heard a loud bang. Very different than the first shot. Alex said she thought she heard glass shattering and felt the air pressure change in the vehicle. Everyone in Blake's car ducked, flinched, and panicked at that second shot, except Caitlin Gillis. She was killed. That shot went through her spinal cord, and that's where she died. The hollow point rifled slug entered the C-pillar, exploded the plastic inside of the metal frame. Alex felt like something hit her face when the air pressure changed, likely the plastic interior from the C-pillar found next to her seat. Jacob felt something hit his head, and he couldn't hear out of his left ear for over 10 minutes, likely the metal fragment found next to him on the floor. Other plastic shrapnel was found in the visor in front of Caitlin Gillis. This is the bullet hole in the Explorer. We're all familiar with the felt material that surrounds the plastic that cups the metal frame of a car. The bullet went through this metal and all of that. This is a close-up from People's 38, photo 969. Photo 866 is item 202. This is, which is in exhibit. We have that in the exhibits. It's in the bag. It wasn't shown, but it's admitted in this trial. And you could look at it if you need to. But there it lay, right next to Jacob. Jacob, who, by the way, happenstance, was not sitting behind Blake. He was sitting in the middle, next to Alex. That's the metal fragment. On this side of the car, this is where Alex was sitting in this seat. This is photo 102 from People's 36. And if we look in closer, you'll see this plastic piece that was identified as coming from the left side of that vehicle. This is the visor in front of Caitlin. And that's the plastic shrapnel from the back of the vehicle into that visor. After the hollow point rifled slug entered the C-pillar, it exploded the plastic inside the metal frame. It traveled across the left shoulder area of the front passenger seat into the corner area of the front passenger door. We heard from Dr. Sikorica of the manner of death. The slug continued to the corner of the door frame before ricocheting to the back seat area and rolling under the driver's seat. That's how much force came from that 20 gauge shotgun. This is People's Exhibit 38, photo 915, showing you the laser trajectory inside the vehicle that the bullet would have traveled given the nature of the hole in the C-pillar. Photo 924. Photo 917. That's where Kalen Gillis sat. Photo 931 is showing you the damage to that door area. (938) is item 206, which was shown to you while the investigator was testifying. This is the metal fragment. Excuse me, this is the projectile. That was looked at by Victoria O'Connell from the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. She identified this as consistent with the weight of the 20-gauge shotgun slug. The rifled slug hollow point. On the left is the picture from the box that was found in the defendant's house. The picture on the right is what it looked like after he killed Kalen Gillis. Let's get to the trajectory. Alex and Max placed Kevin Monahan on the corner of his deck. All witnesses placed the vehicles north of the house and south of the telephone poles. The teens testified they were turning around after the lights came on and were already into the second point of the three-point turn before the first shot came, and then already into the third point driving away when the second shot was fired less than 5 seconds later. Rory was already leaving as the light came on. We know that Scott Smith verifies all this. So, this is the corner area out here on this deck. And now what we have is Amanda Puckett was able to take scans of this with her instruments that she uses to do a 3D scan of this entire property. And she, based on the testimony, based on what she read in the witnesses' accounts, she put together the possible trajectory when she brought all of that together. And this is the possible trajectory. And you'll find that it's consistent with the testimony of the witnesses. She was asked if the assumptions she made were true, would this trajectory be true also? And the answer was yes. Now, there's two possible ones here. The one that turns out you'll find to be true is the one to the left, out here on the corner. This shot is the shot in the trajectory of this car right here. This is a different angle, starting to give you an appreciation of the distance these vehicles were, having already turned into the third point of that three-point turn. Better sense of distance. 24 feet and about 80 feet away, 24 feet below, 80 feet away. 5 seconds earlier from this shot, they wouldn't have been really any closer to that house. This gives you an overhead view, sense of it. And on the deck sense of it as well. That's what he would have seen. And 5 seconds earlier, the taillights would have been facing him. And he shot anyway. Okay. The two shots within the time frame of Patterson Hill Road. This is where it comes down to seeing whether our timeline works. Blake and Max both testified they were only stopped for about 1 minute before the lights came on and they started to leave. Scott Smith said the entire event occurred in less than 4 minutes from the time he could see the vehicles on Patterson Hill Road till the event was over. And that makes sense because he can't see all the way down Patterson Hill Road. In his second call, he indicated that he heard the shots around 9:48, and Jill Nadowski said she heard the shots just before 9:50, when she saw the vehicles that were coming back down Patterson Hill Road. So let's look at the time frame. You have the drive-through on Route 30 to Patterson Hill Road beginning at 9:45 and 47 seconds. Add a minute 45 to that, you have 9:47 and 30 is when they would have arrived at the location where they stopped. Rory joins them about 30 seconds later if he goes up the driveway and comes back down. That's 9:48. At 9:49, the lights turn on and the vehicles start to leave. The first shot is within 20 seconds after the lights turn on. The second shot is within 5 seconds after that. So the question is, 9:49 here, and a minute and 45 back down to Route 30, means they were there for 1 minute at 9:48 to 9:49. All of those kids sat together for 1 minute. And if you add the 30 seconds it takes Rory to go up and come back, 90 seconds total in the driveway of Kevin Monahan. We've already gone through the drive from Patterson Hill Road with the kids once they leave. Stephen Saunders, happenstance to be right in that area when the call comes out, is able to assist these kids. Citadel tells you they have to stop the life-saving measures. Kaylin Gillis was shot to death on April 15th, 2023. And she was pronounced dead on Cemetery Road. From 9:50 to 1:30, Officer Nelson and Nussbaum arrived, engaged with the defendant. Again, he comes out a number of times, kept inviting the police up, but he would not come down. Officer Nelson informs 911 to tell the defendant that the police are investigating a noise complaint. And this is the moment where you have to consider that the police are not going to divulge everything they know. Sir, we're here because we believe you shot and killed somebody and have a gun in your house, and we'd like to come up and talk to you. They use the tools at their disposal. How do you de-escalate the situation? How do you find a common ground that's not accusative, that's something that he might be willing to talk, to bring it to a peaceful resolution? They don't know what's going on in there, how many people there are. So of course, tell them we're here for a noise complaint. It's consistent with the reason we're here, even if you can call it a lie, okay? The kind in this circumstance that you give in order to have the right outcome. But Kevin Monahan found that he could hide in this lie. He could piggyback on this. This is an out. Maybe they're here for a noise complaint. I don't know. There's been some guys hunting with dogs at night. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I was sound asleep. He sat on that stand and told you he lied on that 911 call. He lied. But it's not just that he lied. Why tell him hunters with dogs at night? Why not say party? Why not say any other sound that you could think of? You have common sense. If someone said there's been a noise complaint, would you think gunshot? Would you think party? Would you think someone's being really loud? Why gunshot? Because it's hidden in the truth. And it sends them in a different direction. Except they didn't bite. They stayed there. The defendant puts on a charade to the police and the 911 dispatcher. He admits that he lies to 911. He admitted he lied to the police. And when you listen to the 911 call to the defendant, you hear a charade of a confused old man. Now, this is really something when you listen to it. He's anything but confused. He knows what just happened. He shot the gun twice at people, and police arrived. That's not confusing. That's what's supposed to happen. What's going on? You'll hear him say on there. Are they cops? Use your assessment. Use your common sense. Does that hold any credibility that he was confused as to what was happening? But he's putting on a charade. He's very cunning on the phone. Jinx, I told you not to play the TV so loud. Now, what a comment. You got to ask yourself, where does that fit in? If you listen to that, where does that statement fit in when the police are there because you shot your gun? You turn to your wife and say, I told you not to play the TV so loud. It's a total farce. It's a part of a charade. It's deceptive. His lies were ready and said with ease and confidence. He was calm, cool, and collected, even when the officers were at his door. There was no nervousness in his voice. There was no shakiness in his hand. There was no reaching for words, trying to find the right words so he doesn't accidentally say something. It was all just boldly said. Those are the things that you're looking for as jurors when you're comparing what he says on this stand and what he said in this 911 call. I'm only going to play a few portions of this because I want you to hear his voice. I want you to hear this, at least the first part.
911, where's your emergency?
Hi, I'm at 1263 Patterson Hill Road.
Okay.
There's a car in my yard with lights shining in my house.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a call to him, or is it
I'm not sure. What's your first last name?
Kevin?
Okay, what's your last name?
I'm going to pause it. Do you have a call here? That's searching out what information they have. What do they know? What will they tell him? The police arrived at the other house and he saw them. He knew they were the police. The only call in the area is going to be to his gunshots. So why ask if they have a call there? To know whether he's been caught.
Monahan?
You said your last name was Monahan?
Yeah.
Okay. And you said your address is 1263 Patterson Hill?
Yep.
Hang on just 1 second. Let me see if the officers are in the area there, okay?
Thank you.
Now this is where she's talking to Officer Nelson. He's telling her what to say in order to bring this situation to a peaceful resolution. Bear with me a couple more seconds. I don't have a timestamp on my player, so I can't advance it.
Kevin, are you still there?
Yes.
Alright, I spoke with the officers. They said that they were in the area for a noise complaint.
Well, they're right in my driveway, shining the lights in my house. My driveway's about a half a mile long.
I'm not sure. They just got a noise complaint in the area. They were checking around to see if they could find the location of it.
Oh, okay. There's been some guys hunting with dogs at night.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's it. I don't know. I was sound asleep.
Okay. You said that there have been some hunters with dogs that night?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you were to accept as true everything the defendant said while on the stand, that they are under siege from marauding raiders, would you get any sense from his voice that he just saved his own life and saved his wife at all? You don't even hear that. And if you did just do that, why aren't you telling the police? The kids went through a harrowing experience and they're calling 911, telling them what just happened. But if his events are true, where's that in this call? Where's the voice shaking? This is bold. This is calm, cool, and collected. And it's a charade. This call goes on for 18 minutes. Let me just read you some highlights. You listen, though, to it to verify that what I'm saying is right. Do you know of any parties that would be in the area or anything like that? God, no. I was sound asleep. Kelsey Carpenter telling him that he can go down there if you want to. Not really. Is he going to be there much longer? Kelsey's explaining that they're trying to find the party and shut it down for the evening. Okay, I don't know either. It's really been really quiet right here. Like I said, I've had a really long day. I worked all day. I'm 65 and the heat is tough on me. I wish they'd get out of my yard so I can go back to bed. I'll be honest with you, I fell asleep around 8:30. I haven't heard anything. I want to go back to bed though. I wish they would conclude whatever he's doing and leave me alone. The defendant's interaction with Sergeant Murray. Sergeant Murray sees the defendant coming out of his residence 4 to 5 times, and when the undersheriff arrives, the group of officers go up because it's believed that the undersheriff might know who this is and might have a way to bring this to a conclusion. Turns out it's not that Kevin Monahan. So Officer Winchell turns over the talking with the defendant to Sergeant Murray. And Sergeant Murray has a conversation, and I'm going to play the video here. I'm going to play 2 sections. First, I'm going to play just a little section as they walk up the driveway, and then the section at the house.
2-6, you copy. One 726. What's your location?
Forwarding this along, excuse me.
Two 6, you copy.
Just one moment. Now, right there where you saw, that was where Officer Nelson's vehicle was at the turn of the driveway. That's at about 6.5 minutes into the video. You're going to see that they begin to walk up the driveway. This shows you the lighting conditions. The officers are up and to the left behind that white trailer, barn, and tractor. This is now them on the other side of the house as they're going to approach the porch.
Door. Door. We got 3 total.
sound asleep.
Okay.
Nothing that I know of. I was sound asleep with a little incredulous laugh. It's all still the same charade. And he sat up on that stand and told you he lied to them. We're going to find it's because he has a depraved indifference to the life of the people in that car.
All right, is it just you and your wife? Okay. All right, sorry about it, late now. Can you give me the information, your wife's information, and then we've already got contact by phone.
I was gonna walk down there in the dark, I mean, you guys say you're dark.
All right. Well, I know the other brother,
Yeah,
and you guys are close in age, so I said, well, take a chance with it.
I'm Robert's son,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So talk to the sergeant,
All right.
okay?
Yep.
Give me your information, and we'll go from there, okay?
Talking to you guys.
All right.
What's up?
What do you do?
Huh? Just unlock it.
Legal first name, sir.
Kevin,
What is your middle name?
Daniel,
Last name?
Monahan, M-O-N-A-H-A-N.
Date of birth?
10/28/57.
And what is the physical mailing address here?
1263 Patterson Hill Road. Yeah, it's,
Is there a different 911 area code for this residence? Different 911 address, anything like that?
Not that I know.
No, okay,
I've had 4 mailing addresses since I lived here.
okay. What is the best phone number for you, Kevin?
518-796-2971.
Okay. And what is your wife's first name?
What's your legal name? Is it P. Period?
First initial P, no period, J-I-N-S.
Is the P stand for anything?
No,
No. What's your middle name, ma'am? Middle name?
James.
J-I-N-S.
So just the letter P is your first name?
Yes.
Okay.
That's good. I've never heard of that before.
What's your date of birth, ma'am?
7/28/53.
Now you get mad.
You guys have a beautiful home, so hopefully
Thanks.
this is a little bit.
Do you have a different cell phone number yourself, ma'am? 518? What was the last?
980.
I only heard the first 3 numbers. I only heard the first 3 numbers.
What's this guy?
You asked me my.
Phone number, I only heard the first 3 numbers.
518.
Yep.
854.
854.
9803.
9803. Anybody else here in this residence? Anybody else here at the residence? Has there been anybody else here at all tonight? You guys have any visitors at all tonight?
No.
Did anybody stop by this residence tonight?
No.
Anybody come up the driveway tonight?
I don't know.
There's me standing out here at the door now.
You were sleeping, and your lights shine in the room up.
Okay.
Your lights. Just because everybody up there, you're only up there.
You've had no visitors here at all?
We'll get to it later, but the only time from the events at Patterson Hill Road in this trial, that Kevin Monahan and Jinx Monahan have the same story is right there. When they're lying to 911. We're gonna go through the testimony. They're totally inconsistent with one another, but not that night. They were on the same page, doing the same thing.
We're in recess.